I want to discuss the key principles that guide development within a classroom to understanding the culturally diverse learners that will be your students. There are five main principles, and we call these key principles because they're the skeleton or the backbone to your program, the understanding you need to have. So I'm going to read through them and just kind of give an overall kind of summary at the end. The first one is that everyone has a culture and is the product of one or more cultural groups. This is really important to remember because culture is not just where you come from or the group of people you belong with. It's much bigger than that, and most people identify with one or more cultural groups. What teachers need to remember is that there is no normal culture in our society. Our society is made up of a blend of many cultures over many years coming together and establishing your beliefs and values. So everyone has a culture, and we need to remember that. Second, cultures are dynamic. They're constantly changing within the individuals in the group. And so teachers should not make assumptions that just because you look like someone else or you're from the same family, cousins or siblings, definitely we cannot make assumptions that everyone does things the same or believes the same thing or is the same. Third, culture, language, ethnicity, and race will influence your beliefs and values. And this is really the most important component because when we consider the families that will come to our classroom, they're going to be diverse in their culture. Their language may be different. Their ethnicity or religion or heritage will all affect the beliefs and values of that family. Teachers need to consider the whole child when looking to understand that child and their family. So we're kind of piggybacking on, don't make assumptions about any of these areas. Know that we're the product of a blend of cultural groups and really look to that whole child. And we have to determine ways to communicate with families to find answers to what is that whole child? What are their beliefs? How do they value education? What do they do at their home? How do they discipline? We need to know all these things because they are a blend of their culture, language, ethnicity, and race. The fourth component or key is that children vary within a cultural group as much as they do between cultures. So we can't assume that any child will be like any other child, especially based on culture. You can't look at the population of learners in your classroom and say, oh, you're a white child, so you're going to do things this way. Or you're a Hispanic child, you're going to do things this way. Every child is an individual, and we cannot make any assumptions of their similarities or their differences based on culture. The fifth key is that culture is complicated by issues of power and status between groups. And what this means to teachers is that teachers must understand how power and privilege affect relationships and communication. Teachers must have an awareness of how they feel about their own culture and their own power or privilege. And they need to make sure that when they communicate, they don't take their own feelings of normal or as normal and say that someone is different because they don't believe the same things as they do. We also hear so many words like dominant group, majority, minority. These are words of power, and it lessens culture or people of different cultures and says that they're not the norm or they're the smaller group and therefore we have more power than them. So an awareness of our own beliefs is very important as a teacher because we will enter into a relationship differently if we have beliefs that our normal is the only normal. Just kind of stepping away from the culture aspect, I want to use that word in a different way. A lot of times we think culture and we think very specifically in our heads, it's your race, it's your ethnicity, it's the group that you belong to, and it is all of those things. But culture is your family beliefs more than anything. It is a blend of many different things: your socioeconomic status, your religion, your upbringing, your family values, and every single family has their own culture. An example of this is when my husband and I first came together I got married. We had dated for a long time, but when we were finally married and we blended our two family cultures together, it didn't seem like it would be that big deal. And to be quite honest, we grew up in very similar neighborhoods. Our families were about the same socioeconomic status. On paper, we looked like the same. And actually, we were, people used to say we were brother and sister because we looked similar. We had light hair, light eyes, similar builds. We got married, and our first Christmas together was a real challenge because my family had traditions and beliefs about how to celebrate that holiday. And his family and his upbringing was different. They did Christmas very, very different. Now, we had spent Christmases together, but never in our own home doing our own version of it. And I kept saying to him, "You're not doing it right. Now, this isn't what we do at Christmas." And he said, "Well, you're doing it wrong." And we had this conflict because I thought how my family did Christmas was basically how every family did Christmas because it was my normal. And he had that same assumption, but he had his own normal. And it took that awareness of that first year together. Oh my goodness, you do a lot of very different things than my family did. And we had to blend those together and come up with what was our family's normal. And now that we have our children, we do things, a blend of what was his childhood Christmas and what was my childhood Christmas. I know this is a very specific example, but when we enter into that classroom as a teacher, we encounter these families. They're normal about school. What is school supposed to give? How do I raise my children? How do I discipline my children? How do we do homework at our house? All of that is going to have every child will have its own culture that answers those questions. And I guarantee no child in your classroom will have the same culture when it comes to these questions. And they will not be the same as how you were raised or how you raise your children now. All we need to know is that we need to accept that there's differences, and we can't make our culture or our normal be the standard for everyone else's normal. We have to have that understanding and acceptance that there are differences, and we will view each person with an open mind. And these are the key principles that guide development within our classroom.